just to switch things up a little bit and talk about stigma in that way. Also be sharing some research, some current research findings around our communities as it pertains to mental health and stigma and getting the services that we need. And then also with all of Scarlett and I's community conversation, we always try to tie in the cultural aspect of it. How does all of this connect to our culture? Like, how can, like, where does all of that meet? So we always want to include some type of cultural aspect into our conversations, right? So we'll share a little bit about that as I try to connect it to my Samoan culture, and have some conversation around that as well. So, and then finally, we want to share some practical tips that we say to be able to help you. Hopefully, it'll be helpful for you in being able to navigate some of the cultural stigmas. And then we'll end up with just, introducing or talking a little bit about some of the resources that might be available for you as a student on your Green River campus. So that is what we are getting into today. All right. So, as I said, this is our sort of like reflection on stigmas and mental health. So, what are some stigmas in your culture? Like, for example, like for me, it's like, what are some stigmas that I can think of in my own Samoan culture around mental health and seeking mental health services? Like, what are some of those things? Like, for example, in many AA NHPI cultures, there can be beliefs that like mental health issues is indicative of like maybe a family failure, or it could be a spiritual issue, right? It could be like a curse, like a family curse. Like those are some of the stigmas that if someone in my family is like maybe we identify as like, okay, this person has mental health issues, then one of the things that I heard growing up was, oh, it's like it's something, the parents did something wrong. The parents did something that they weren't supposed to do. And so now this is why their kid is like that. So like a generational sin or a generational curse or something like that. So those are just some of the stigmas, for example, that I could remember growing up and hearing. So I'm just curious, just gonna put this out there for conversation. What are some stigmas in your culture around mental health?
So while everybody thinks, I will, so everyone think and then share your answer and we will read it. So I'll start us off. I think growing up, spoken stigma, but it was more of you be quiet, don't say anything, and so you just learn to uh internalize whatever's going on with you. Like you're not supposed to be think about it because it was the whole like especially for women, and and then also being someone is like get through it, get through it. Like you can do it. Like just life's not that hard. Like everybody else has hard, and it's like, but you can handle it. Just do it. And it's like, but I don't know what to do. so so there's that
Yeah.
stigma, I would say, for sure.
Mhm. I think one of the things that you and I always heard from people too, whenever we'd have this conversation with them, is like, and I think we did touch up on it a little bit too in the previous conversation last week.
Hmm.
Like going to seek mental health services, it wasn't for us.
Yeah.
It really wasn't for us. Like this isn't for us.
Hmm.
And so I think like when we say like what are some cultural stigmas that you could think of, right? You shared that experience of like, okay, just like tough it out, push through it, things like that. For me, like I said before, some of those cultural stigmas was oh, the parents did something. That's why
Hmm.
their kids got mental health issues, is because it's the sins of the parents or something like that, right?
Hmm.
I see we have a hand raised. Go ahead, unmute yourself.
I thank you so much. I think one thing, I am also someone, so this is really exciting to see you both in this. I almost felt like emotional in the very beginning because I was like, I don't think I've
Hmm.
ever seen like this at all. So I really appreciate this space.
Yay.
I think Something that I noticed a lot when I was growing up, my father, I think just him assuming that it was just we needed to figure it out. It's kind of what you said, that we needed to figure it out on our own, or that
Mm-hmm.
honestly that doctors don't tell the truth. I
Mm.
think that was one thing that
Wow.
was really kind of pressed from him, is that, he didn't typically, they weren't going to the same sort of doctors as us, and it was more
Mm-hmm.
internal or home medicine. So when anything like that was brought up, it was, we can figure it out at home. We just need to love you more, or you need to figure, kind of like that. So I think something, even
Yeah.
just the idea of doctors in general, is something that we are still overcoming as a
Mm-hmm.
family, as a community, and seeking that trust and believing that they know what they're doing and that they're for us. So that's
Mm-hmm.
something that I still talk to my family about, that, learning that trust. And there's not always doctors that are trustful. So yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I think that's what there's a lot of unfortunate damage that's been done by the medical field to especially people of color. And so hopefully the trainings that they get, they are utilizing the training and not just attending just to attend. So, Lay, see your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. I really resonate a lot with similar to what Lilia had shared as far as like also being Samoan and some of the things that you, Scarlett and Sala had mentioned. I think for me, like in my family, like mental health issues is just non-existent. Like what my dad used to say is that mental health issues is a Balangi thing. It's like
Mm-hmm.
only white people experience that. Like Samoan people do not
Mm-hmm.
experience mental health issues, and it's more of like you just gotta like power through, get through it, you know. So yeah, I
Yeah.
don't really talk about mental health a lot in my family either.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Lay. I mean, it's definitely a heavy stigma, because the unfortunate thing, like even with men, like the stigma around men sharing, it's like if you share, it's a sign of weakness. If men aren't supposed to have mental health issues because they're supposed to be the protectors, providers, and it's not allowing them to be vulnerable. So to see, and it's really cool to see when people start to lessen the stigma and actually start to move through it, because we've been running these classes for a while, and so when people can talk about stuff like this, because that was the reason why Sala and I wanted to do these community conversations, because these were the things that were not being talked about in our communities, and we wanted to bring what was being talked about in private to the public space, because that's what needed to be done in order to start changing the stigmas around mental health just in general.
Hmm. Yeah. Oh, for sure. Changing that narrative is so important to
Mm-hmm.
Scarlett and I, and why we continue to have these conversations. And then especially tying in the culture, right? You can join any mental health conversation on anything pertaining to mental health. But I think what makes sort of like our conversations unique is because we really do integrate that cultural piece in it. Like and
Mm-hmm.
we know how to, as women of color as well. So I think another thing I want to add to this question too is just the seeking help, period. Right? Seeking help, period. Like I think that's huge, especially in our communities where it's like you don't go outside of your family, right? If you're going through things, like it stays in. If the family is going through things, like we keep it in the family, and then unfortunately there are so many instances where some of those things are just kind of like swept under the carpet, right? And not being talked about. And then it just continues to hurt our community and continues to hurt our people. And so I think like what Scarlett mentioned earlier, the reason why we're having these conversations is because this is what we are seeing from our communities that are coming to therapy. That when they finally do take that step and is sitting across from us, we know it takes so much for them to get to that point to where they are reaching out. And so, even just for them, just a stigma around, going and talking to someone else outside of your family, outside of your church, outside of, just praying about it, like it's still such a huge stigma, such a huge stigma. And this is why it's like so important, like what Scarlett mentioned earlier. Let's bring those conversations that are often not talked about, and bring it to the forefront. Like let's have those conversations, because this is the road to be able to destigmatize or be able to have open conversations about these really, really hard topics. Anything else? Any other comments or anything anybody want to share? Okay. All right. We are moving along here. All right, so we're just gonna watch a short clip as we're talking about stigma. I think this clip was very interesting, and we'll come back and we'll have a conversation on it. Scarlett, please let me know if you can hear the audio on this one.
You can be born perfectly rich, have a very good lifestyle, have parents who care very well for you. I don't think mental health issues discriminate against anyone of any race, gender, or social background.
Hi, nice to meet you. Please have a seat.
My name is Nicole. I'll be a moderator.
I'm Nicholas. Today, I'm going to ask you a few questions about mental health in Singapore. What do you know about mental illness?
I just know there's depression.
How do you say that? Bipolar disorder.
The wire short circuit,
This guy's crazy, all these kind of words.
Has nothing to do with me.
Would you hire somebody with mental health condition?
I'll probably, make them work in a, admin side.
Sweeper, cleaner, or some simple job for them.
Either they hurt themselves or they're going to hurt somebody else. Then if you have mental illness, you apply for a job. But who in the right sense will really want to take you?
Would you date somebody who has a mental health condition?
Some of them will get quite manipulative. They'd say like, if you break up with me, I'll cut myself or I'll kill myself.
And then sometimes they tend to post unreasonable things, such as like a small thing that happened, and then they'll make a big fuss out of it.
I cannot handle. I don't know how to handle.
How would you react to, a friend or family member who's diagnosed with mental illness?
The bridging needs to be the family and not a stranger.
我们不是专业医生，我们可能处理不了。
If possible, I would just stay away as far as possible.
这个笑诶，最好是不要靠近他。
I didn't introduce myself fully. I suffer from clinical depression.
I was clinically diagnosed with depression. I'm living in recovery.
And I overcame it. I wrote a letter that I would like you to read out to me aloud.
"12 years is a long time to live with a mental health condition.
In the 12 years that I've been diagnosed with depression,
This is what I've learned.
I've learned that the greatest battles we fight are the ones with ourselves.
I've learned that most conversation about employment end the moment I reveal my diagnosis. I've learned that shame is something society teaches you. I've learned how to say sorry for showing symptoms of my condition.
I've learned that friends can disappear, and I will never hear from them again.
I've learned that family doesn't always know how to support you, no matter how much you need them.
I've learned that hope is a little voice that whispers maybe.
I've learned that recovery is a process. I've learned that one small crack doesn't mean I'm broken.
I've learned that I have an illness, but this illness is not my identity.
so sorry that you have to go through this.
I'm so
Do you have any questions you want to ask me?
So this was really interesting clip, right? So this was a social experiment that they did in Singapore just to be able to find out like what people think about mental health. And as you can see from the video, there's so much stigma around it. And I think you see the thing is with stigma is it leads to misunderstanding. And that misunderstanding ends up hurting, does so much more hurt and cause so much more pain to anyone that is experiencing mental health distress, right? So before I go on, I just want to give space and give time to see if anybody wanted to share anything that maybe stood out to them from this video.
I'll start. So I think the great thing, what this video portrayed was the misperception of what mental illness looks like.
Mm-hmm.
You
So
know,
good.
because a lot of them were looking for somebody's, I
Mm-hmm.
love that they showed that.
Yeah. And especially, and this is why when we talk about cultural stigmas, why it's so important that we identify what those cultural stigmas are. And so we can, so that way we can, because I think in order for us to move forward in anything, it's like, okay, let me figure out why. Let me peel back the layers. Let me figure out why I think the way that I think about this. And so it was really interesting to see in that video how even they were like, oh yeah, someone with a mental illness, yeah, I'll give them a job like sweeping and you know a job. So it's like in their mind, and this is all stigma, right? So in their mind, someone with a mental health condition is incapable of like functioning even,
Functioning.
right? So it's like they're like, oh, we'll just, you know, make sure that they're not as but they were really surprised in the end to find out like, oh, you are talking with someone that's been dealing with clinical depression for X amount of years. And so I think like this is why this conversation is so important as we, you know, talk about cultural stigmas, like what are those things that comes up for us? Sorry, Lani, go ahead.
I was gonna say I really liked how the video had folks who like it mirrored them, people who are experiencing like mental health issues or like have a mental health condition, because then I saw how like a lot of people got really emotional, just like having that connection of like, oh, this person is also like from my same community, or they look like me, and like some of the things I just said, you know, like it hurt them.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think sometimes the perception could probably also be that mental illness, mental health is it's almost like a socioeconomic status. You know, that people who have money don't have mental health issues. People who do not have money have them, and that's not true. And I
Yeah.
love that's what that showed.
Yeah. Yeah, this video definitely like highlighted that. It highlighted how stigma, well, like with stigma, it involves like negative attitudes, negative beliefs, even discrimination, right? It even showed like discrimination towards people that have a mental health condition. And I think like when we are not aware of the stigmas that are maybe like, you know, we don't know that it's there, but it's because it's like it's part of our culture sometimes, and we'll talk more about that in a bit. But in a way, when we continue to think this way and we continue to function from these stigmas, we end up excluding people that are really going through a difficult time. Right? We end up like treating them like, okay, like I don't think you're able to do this job or but one thing I also love about this video is just that I think these people that were interviewed walked away with a different understanding of mental health.
Absolutely.
Anything else before we move on? All right. So this, you know, word cloud, of course, like this is just a compilation of like different words or different stigmas that usually came up when we're having this conversation with our communities. And of course, a lot of the stigma is around, you know, if I seek help, I'm going to be portrayed as weak. If I'm going to get help for depression, they might think I'm crazy. So I might end up bringing dishonor to my family, or like what I mentioned earlier about curse, right? So these myths, these cultural myths, or just different ways that our culture was trying to, I think what it is sometimes our culture is trying to explain something that they didn't really fully understand, or yeah, they didn't fully understand. So we have these stories, and we have these, things that we see now as like, okay, this sounds like it's a generational curse that we use to explain away these conditions. Want to bring this conversation to the forefront so that hopefully you can have an awareness of what part these cultural stigmas is maybe, serving even as a barrier for you as a student to be able to get the help that you need, right? I'm going to play another short clip. And I think this short one is it's a funny one, because in the Samoan community we tend to do everything with humor. I think it's a way that we sometimes often cope with serious conversations. But we'll have a little bit talk conversation after I show this clip. Scarlett, let me know if the audio comes through okay.
Hey! Shh! Why you look sad? Huh?
It's nothing.
Oh, okay.
Mom. Mom.
Hi, sit. Ah. Hi. Why you cry?
Do you know I have mental issues?
Yeah. I know you're mental. Your dad knows you're mental. The whole family, we always talk about you. We say, hey, he's kind of mental. Hey, mental issues? Yes, mental is you. You are mental.
Say, Mom, I'm being serious. Like I have depression. What should I do?
You just said it.
What?
You said you have depression. So just take a deep breath in and a deep breath out.
I have anxiety.
Oh, how exciting. Are you excited? What are you excited for, son?
You know what? Never mind.
Okay, love you, son. Hallelujah! Praise the Lord.
So this is just a short clip because I think so many people can like kind of relate to it. But there's like still seriousness about this issue, of like in our communities, right? So of course, like from this video alone, you could see how like say the child is trying to bring up something, talk about feelings, talk about what they're going through to the parent, and obviously the mom is just kind of like making light of the situation. And this is pretty common, unfortunately. This conversation, as funny as it is pretty common, and often how people in our communities respond to when they are approached with difficult topics or difficult conversations like this one. Scarlett, did you want to add anything to this one?
Yeah, I always laugh at that. I think one of the things that, especially what I know about our PI people, our Pacific Island people, is that oftentimes when we get uncomfortable, we either go to jokes or aggressiveness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so that video, though funny, it is still serious in the same
Mm-hmm.
context. And so this is why we're teaching these classes, because the one of the thing, even though he was playing his mom, the thing that I always pick up, I go, oh, the mom's uncomfortable with her own feelings, so she's not going to be comfortable with her son's feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And so I continue to hope that because we know these things happen, that it can definitely deter and change
Mm-hmm.
by everyone who attends these community conversations for sure.
Yeah, not only uncomfortable, I would even, kind of venture to say that didn't know how, right? Because a lot
Absolutely.
of times it's like our parents in our communities, like our parents don't, like we didn't have parents that set us down with the feelings wheel and say, okay, sweetie, this is the feeling that you are experiencing right now. This is called anger, right? Like, no, we didn't have that. And so, and a lot of the people in our community don't have, like, we don't have like the words even sometimes to describe what we're feeling or even talk about it. So I see also in this video how, and maybe because mom is like, I don't know how to talk to my kid about depression. I don't know how to talk to my kid about anxiety. So guess what I know how to do and how I'm going to respond to this situation. I'm just gonna make light of it. I'm just like, let's just pray about it, or let's just do this, let's just, but really kind of making light of the situation.
I'm going to tell a quick story about sharing feelings, which comes to our feelings class, please. Here's the
Yes.
reason, and I say this because I want you to know, for those whose parents don't share their feelings, that it can change. So I got to give a shout out to my father, because I didn't teach him feelings. What I started doing was sharing my feelings to him. And as time went on, he started sharing his feelings. And this was a man who grew up in both Samoas, okay? So very, very hardcore. And I want to just give that as a story of encouragement that it can change. You just have to meet your parents where they're at.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Scarlett. Yeah, so in like, in most of our AA and HPI communities and most of our cultures, like mental health issues are, often viewed through the lens of like community reputation. So whatever we do, and I think someone mentioned it earlier, it's like whatever we do, it's not that I'm looking at what's going to happen to me. It's more so, how is this going to reflect on my family? So when I go to see a therapist, I'm not thinking about, oh, I'm going to see a therapist for me. I'm thinking, I'm going to go see a therapist. Oh my goodness, what if someone saw my car parked outside the therapist's office? They're going to think my family. They're going to think, oh, that's the last name so and so, and I know where their family's from. And so that's where our minds go when it comes to like seeking these services. And again, cultural stigma. So there can be a fear that goes into seeking therapy when it comes to things like this, which is, again, like we keep stressing in this conversation, why it's so important that we make known these stigmas, these cultural stigmas, like the one in this word cloud. I'm curious if anybody else have any questions or like any comments, or maybe even a cultural stigma word that you don't see on this word cloud. Just want to give space for that. Good to go. All right, we are moving on. All right, just to share some research findings. So research shows that ANHPI individuals, of course, that includes our college students, are less likely to use mental health services due to cultural stigmas. In addition to that, also financial barriers, also language differences, or language barrier as well. So, what this means is, like, for example, like a student might be not going to therapy until they're like experiencing like severe depression at that point. And then they're like, oh, okay, I think something's going on. I really need to go see a therapist. Like they won't, like research is pretty much saying like it's not until our conditions are severe in our communities, like it's not until something is severe that's when we move to get the help that we need. But it doesn't have to get to that point. Right. And I think that's why, again, we want to be able to like make sure that we're addressing these barriers, so that way we can be able to get the help that we need if and when we need it. Anything else you want to add to this one, Scarlett?
Yeah, the reason, just to continue to extend what Sala is saying, like we are encouraging to take a proactive stance and not to wait, because a lot of times some of the clients that we see, especially our PI community, it becomes reactive, and they're coming in just what we call like emotional dumping, because they've been through so much over the years. And so we just want to encourage you, not saying that you can't do that, correct that, you can do that, but we just want to encourage you, if you're going, like, to be more proactive about whatever the challenges that you're facing and not reactive.
That's good. And it's like, also understanding that I think someone had shared earlier about how just even mental health or anything regarding mental health was like non-existent in their growing up, in their, childhood experience. But here's the thing, it doesn't mean that it wasn't there. It doesn't mean that you weren't going through things. I think even last week when we showed a video of how some of the elders in our community coming in from like Fiji, Tonga, Samoa, coming into the States, and they were pretty much, I think what I remember someone saying from that conversation was, it wasn't until we got here to America that we know about depression, that we know about anxiety or bipolar or any of that. But the thing is, it doesn't mean it didn't exist when they were in the islands. It was there. It just looked different, and they didn't maybe know or have the resources, or even have the understanding to be able to identify that, right? Because like research clearly shows that like our communities, we underutilize mental health services, but doesn't mean that we're not experiencing it. We are experiencing it, but we're not getting the help that we need. And I think a large part of that is in due to a lot of these cultural stigmas that we are experiencing. Anything, any questions or comments, or anything anybody want to add? Okay, so additional research, of course, studies indicate that having a social network, a strong social network, makes our AA-NHPI individuals more likely to get help, which I think sometimes it's not surprising because we to have that wealth of like community network. And the study saying like, oh, we're more likely to get help if we're like connected to our communities or connected to other people in our communities. Like, I totally, totally agree. So I think this is pretty relevant to connect to like student groups like the Asian American Association or the PI Club, or like any of those organizations that just gives you a sense of community. I think really is can be helpful in being able to encourage those discussions about mental health, or even make it a lot more likely for you to be able to get the help that you need, or be able to like, okay, maybe let me consider going to therapy, right? Anything else you want to add on here, Scarlett?
No, but I have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
So, what would you say to somebody who's in therapy? They want their parents to go to therapy, and their parents don't want to talk about mental health because of their stigmas. Like, how would you help them navigate that?
Oh, that's gonna be how old is the student?
What would you say they're adults? Adults
So they're
like 20,
adults.
21 and up.
So there's a lot of ways we can address this. Like, first of all, like, I mean, you can talk, you can have the conversation with your parents if they are open, and if they're saying they're not open to it. I'd say there's really not much that you as an adult person can do. And part of that is the legal part of it is, like you have to consent to be able to go to therapy. And so if you cannot get your parents' consent to go to therapy, unfortunately, you cannot make them go to therapy, and vice versa. But you can still have the conversation. Another thing you can do is to get them to at least maybe open up is just invite them to conversations like this. Send them the link, let them know like, hey, this is what this topic is talking about right now. So, maybe they want to tap in that way, because maybe that way is easier for them versus like going and talking to someone one-on-one. What would you say, Scarlett?
Nothing different than what you're saying. Is because I think it's parents holding on to old stigmas, and
Oof.
Because they have a hard time letting them go.
Oof.
So, as you can tell by our laughter and breaths. um, but yeah, I don't think I think because it's and that's why we say invite them to these classes, because you don't see two Samoan women who are licensed therapists who've been in the field, who have like 20 plus years experience combined, that talk about these things and talk about them comfortably, and so it kind of takes the barrier down, like, oh, okay, I see, like my people are teaching this
Mm-hmm.
versus whatever they've seen before. So I think that's why Sala's saying, invite them to our class. It's not saying they'll come,
Yeah.
but just invite them. You just keep inviting them, and because that's all you can do at this point. And so, and
Yeah.
just continue to encourage, just continue to work on whatever you need to work on, regardless of where
Yes.
your parents are at.
Yeah, which reminds me, that'll be very helpful to have those cultural boundaries. And boundaries is a very sensitive topic, but the way Scarlett teaches those cultural boundaries or just helping people navigate those boundaries, as we know, boundaries is almost like non-existent in our cultures as well. So that Scarlett does an amazing job. I can't remember if it's on our series or not. But also really good conversation just to have as you're thinking about like navigating those conversations with your parents, and maybe you're trying to like, resolve years of like trauma or something like that with your parents, because we have had that. We have had clients and community members that are like, this is what, I experienced as a child. I feel like I need to, talk to my parents about this. Like, okay, you can work with a therapist in therapy to figure out how you can have those conversations, right? And how to be able to like, okay, well, what's your first step to having that conversation? Some therapists would even say if it's okay if you want to invite your parents to come into one of your therapy sessions, and then the therapist will be able to facilitate those conversations. But yes, if you want more questions on that, I don't want to deviate too far from our conversation today. But yes, we are here if you have any additional questions on that as well. Anything else on this? Any questions or comments? All right. All right, so this is usually the part where I like to tie in culture. So the pictures that you see is that of a Samoan falitali or a Samoan guest house, traditional guest house. This is where in the Samoan culture, like we do a lot of our traditions, a lot of our ceremonies, things like that. And so it's a significant representation of our culture, like this structure, right? And this Samoan psychologist that is in New Zealand, I believe, he emphasized pretty much like how mental health is linked to the cultural practices and the community well-being. So for college students, I think like just being able to understand that mental health isn't just a you problem, isn't just an individual problem, but